I told you it's not ready yet.
Honey, just show it to them.
God, son, that's wonderful.
Hey guys, welcome back to another Destiny 2 build guide, and today I actually have a commenter submission build, and this is something that I have just fallen in love with, and for the next, basically rest of the season, I'll be using this for any solo master level content, legend content, hell, even potentially grandmaster content that I do with friends. It's that incredible, and it's utilizing an exotic that I personally haven't touched for essentially when it first came out, which is Severance Enclosure. If you're anything like me, you can probably count the number of times you've used this thing on one hand, but that has completely changed with this build, and the true potential of an exotic like this has shown through. So again, the commenter was Jay Talley, or Tolly, sorry if I mispronounced your name, I can't pronounce half the things in the English language, but this is their build that they commented about a week ago on my most recent build guide, and I've fallen in love with this build. So thank you, Jay, for submitting this. Absolutely incredible. And for all of you guys watching, if you have any builds that you want to share, be sure to leave them down in the comment down below. I'll make a video, I'll check them out. I love this kind of stuff. But without further ado, let's get right into the video. This is another Middle Tree Hammer build, so of course we have Burning Maul, Roaring Flames, Throwing Hammer, and we're going to be utilizing that as our main source of actually proccing this build and getting it off the ground. Jumping into our armor mods. The first one we're going to be using today is on our helmet. It's Lucent Blade. For those that don't know, it consumes 1 stack of Charged with Light, and for 5 seconds your sword damage is buffed by 35%, which is absolutely insane for just getting 1 stack of Charged with Light, enabling this to have a lot of specific boss damage DPS, single target DPS, from any sword essentially. We're also pairing this with 2 stacks of hands-on, because we are going to be using finisher mods that consume part of our super bar, so getting the most out of our melee hits is going to be very crucial to actually getting this build the highest level of potency that it can. We're then going to look to our gauntlets where we have Font of Wisdom, and this is the one mod that if you guys want to swap out for say a Warmind mod, I'd recommend. This is kind of a placeholder as there really wasn't anything available to kind of extend the potency of this build away from using like a Warmind mod and just making this a full Warmind cell build, which you totally can if you want to. But if you're looking to swap something out or say, oh, well, I'd really like to use something like this with Charge with Light, or, you know, use my grenade more, so I might use firepower, for instance, swap this mod out, you'll be good to go. But besides that, we're using Impact Induction. Again, this is a must because we're going to be throwing our melee charge constantly, so each time we deal damage with our melee charge, we're going to get portions of our grenade back, and that's where you can really start benefiting and synergizing like in my last build video. I'm personally rocking Overload Submachine Gun, as again, this whole build is something I've taken as sort of an endgame champion killer content level. If you want to double dip into something like Impact Induction, you totally can. Moving forward, we're then onto our chest piece with Severance Enclosure. Now the exotic perk in this is something that I'm not even going to try to pronounce because look at that. But essentially what it does is any powered melee final blows create a damaging explosion, which is approximate to the same damage of your throwing hammer, which is pretty decent, not gonna lie. But the main part where this shines is with finishers and final blows against more powerful targets generate larger and more damaging explosions. So let's say you do a finisher on a champion, for example, this is going to create a massive explosion, potentially killing most low-level adds and even Grandmaster content without a problem. And so to take advantage of this, we're going to be utilizing this with our melee charge through our hammers, as well as with our finishing mods that I'm going to showcase here in a sec. The first is Empowered Finish, enabling us to get charged with light by consuming 1/10 of our super bar. Again, using Font of Wisdom as well as hands-on, it enables us to get the most out of our super energy, while also being able to actually use Empowered Finish and other finishing mods to chain with Severance Enclosure and the whole explosive champion killer mindset that we have with this build. For everything else, I'm just using sword reserves as well as a melee damage resistance for when we're up close, enabling us to use our sword more often and again, get those high-end kills a lot easier. Onto our legs, we're then going to use Well of Life, which is a new elemental mod for this season. This was something that I actually tried incorporating into a few solar builds that I've done so far, but it's really hard to do because a lot of solar builds on Titan benefit from Warmind cells and energize and really well with Warmind cell builds. So using Well of Life properly really required a whole nother elemental mod, and at that point you're cutting out almost half of that Warmind cell build, and it wasn't really justifiable. But since this build exists entirely outside of Warmind cells, it's perfectly viable here. essentially picking up a Solar Elemental Well grants increased regeneration for 10 seconds. Now, this isn't anything that you're going to be shaking off one shot anytime soon. You're not going to be walking through Grandmaster level content without a care in the world for 10 seconds. It's a very slow regen, but it is extremely noticeable, and given like 2 or 3 seconds, you'll have your full HP back in no time. So again, we're combining this with our Hammer Throw, which after we pick up getting a kill, also replenishes our HP. We're good to go. Again, I'm rocking this with Absolution, just so that anytime we pick up an Orb of Power, we get all our abilities cooldowns reduced, as well as Sword Scavenger, because again, we're going to be using our sword a lot as a finishing tool for high HP and powerful targets. And then finally on our mark, we're going to be rocking Explosive Wellmaker. Now, this is kind of iffy. Explosive Wellmaker does proc from our base Hammer Throw, so whenever you throw that throwing hammer on Military Hammer, it hits an enemy, there's a small explosion. Explosive Wellmaker will spawn and proc from that, actually spawning a Solar Elemental Well. It doesn't proc with Severance Enclosure. It's very finicky because Severance Enclosure itself is not really an elemental explosion, even though it looks just like one. So this mainly procs from your hammer, so don't expect to be finishing every single time with Explosive Wellmaker and generating a Solar Well mod. It's mainly going to come from your melee ability. On top of that, we're also going to be utilizing Sundering Blast as a sort of way to stagger those high-end champions. So again, you get that initial blast, say on a barrier champion, it scatters all those adds, you get it down lower with other weapons, finish it off, you have a whole nother damaging explosion from Severance Enclosure, also blasting and killing those adds away, enabling you to have a lot more efficient time killing those champions in high level content, even with tons of adds mobbing you. For our last one, we're going to be using Healthy Finisher. This is another finisher mod that dips into our super energy, essentially healing us every time we get a finisher. This is really important, again, in higher end content because we're typically going to be at lower health. Running in there to finish a champion typically means there are a lot of other adds in the area. This just simply heals you up for that, keeps you from just getting killed as soon as you finish them off. I will recommend, though, Energy Accelerant. For those that don't know, this mod has basically been breaking the game for the past month and a half. Any kind of elemental explosion, this will buff. So with that being said, this does not work with Severance Enclosure, but it does work with your Hammer Throw. So that initial explosion the hammer does by itself, this will buff, and it actually buffs it pretty significantly. I believe it's double the damage, but this does not work with Severance Enclosure simply because Severance Enclosure isn't an elemental explosion, so to speak. Now, we're going to be seeing the weapons we're using for this. Jay, who was the commenter that actually recommended this build, personally said for Monte Carlo, as it simply gives you your melee energy back extremely quickly if you miss your hammer throw or if you have your hammer actually explode before picking it up. It gives it back to you very, very quickly, and it's something I recommend. If you're looking at higher level content, though, this is what I would personally recommend to fit the sort of champion killer vibe that I've gone with this build. The first is basically any primary SMG, so I'm using the Extraordinary Rendition, but if you have something like a Friction Fire that you really enjoy using, this is a great way to go with that. And again, that's dipping into Overload Submachine Gun on our Gauntlets to help stagger those higher end champions. In our energy, I'm using Ariana's Vow, which is the unique energy hand cannon, and it's absolutely incredible. I haven't used this thing in a while, and I forgot how potent it is, especially in higher end content. It can basically stagger any barrier champion in 2 shots, very good damage overall, and with the Exotic Catalyst, it does auto-loading holster, so you can basically completely negate the long reload time of something like this. And then finally, I'm using Crown Splitter. I know I'm a little bit late to the party actually making a video on Crown Splitter, but for those that don't know, putting Energy Accelerant on with a heavy swing with this essentially doubles the damage, and we're talking Thunder Crash level damage, essentially 400,000 in a single swing, meaning this thing can finish off most champions even in master level content in one hit. So if you do want to rock Energy Accelerant with this build, Crown Splitter will definitely benefit from that, but just in case you aren't, it still benefits from Lucent Blade, enabling that 35% damage buff in one swing. But yeah, that's pretty much the build for today. Again, thanks Jay Talley for recommending this build. I really, really appreciate it, and it's exactly what I'm looking for. Something like Severance Enclosure is an exotic that I would have never considered to be viable in today's meta, simply because it doesn't seem like much on the surface. But builds like this are what I love, because it shows that, hey, even though this exotic is fairly niche, it still shines in an incredible way. It works extremely well with military hammers, and overall has made one of the most fun builds I have ever played with in this game. So I highly recommend each and every one of you, if you're looking for a solar build to try out for this season, something to kind of shake up your playstyle and kind of have an entertaining way of doing it, this is the build for you. But again, if you guys like what you see today, be sure to subscribe, hit the like button down below, share with a friend if you think they'd love to see something like this too, and let me know what comments or suggestions for future builds that you also have. I love seeing the ideas that you guys come up with, all the different things that you guys might be rocking that I would have never even thought of. It's incredibly fun to use, and I had an awesome time doing so. You guys have a great day, and thanks for watching.